All right.
Dear Lord, our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the privilege that we have, dear Lord, to come into your presence. Father, as we come before you, we pray, oh Lord, that this time we have together will give us wisdom, knowledge, understanding, and discernment. Father, we hope that we will be able to apply the information that you have allowed us this privilege to obtain. And we ask, dear Father, that the habits that we need to put in place in order to not be overtaken by any addictions or not to be used by the enemy, that, dear Father, you will give us the strength to do so. Be with those who are on and their families and those who could not make it, dear Father, and those who are on their way. May we, dear Father, live lives pleasing in your sight. In Jesus' precious name we do pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so we are excited to have with us this afternoon. I always go to say Doctor uh, Johnson Arloo. He is professor extraordinaire. Well, I'll say that after. So, Mr. Arloo worked in addiction with the behavioral health group for more than 8 years before leaving in August to work in private practice. He's a licensed counselor in Huntsville, Alabama, and he holds a master's in clinical psychology with an emphasis on positive psychology. His master's thesis was on the topic, the role of positive psychology constructs in the subjective well-being and self-esteem of African American college students. His area of expertise includes adult therapy with an emphasis on substance abuse, co-occurring disorders, anxiety and depression, communication skills, coaching, and positive psychology. Mr. Johnson Arloo is married with 3 children. In addition to counseling, he taught at Alabama A&M University for 5 years, and he has also written the Arloo Essay Matrix, a book on college essay writing, which currently retails on Amazon. And in his leisure time, which I laugh at when he says leisure time, he likes to write, cook, swim, walk, and travel. He is also an avid entrepreneur. So you see why I kind of smile when he says in his leisure time. Um, I can also say that for Johnson, when Johnson taught at Alabama A&M University, he was very student focused, very engaging with his students. And I can say that I was a benefactor of his teaching and that many of the students he recommended to serve our students as tutors, they were exemplary. So it gives me, it's a great honor, privilege for me this afternoon to bring to you Johnson Arloo to serve as our presenter for Overcoming Addictions. Johnson, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much for that glowing introduction. And I'm happy to be here to get the opportunity to talk about addiction. Um, Addiction became personal for me in my early 20s when one of my friends, my very close friends, got hooked on it. He was a bodybuilder and he had the stature. So one of the prominent men in my city took him on as a bodyguard. And I think he came into a lot of money. And all of a sudden, he wasn't moving with us anymore. He was moving in so-called higher classes. And I didn't see him for about a year or two. Next time I saw him, he had lost weight. He looked emaciated, scruffy. I mean, all the adjectives. And I asked him, what's going on? And he said, when the money came, the other things followed. The next thing I knew, I was a junkie. I said, wow. And then he asked me for money. I couldn't refuse. So from that moment, I started thinking about it. And even in my undergrad class, I wrote a long essay on drugs. So that is probably the genesis of my interest with addiction. Now, this workshop is about giving a comprehensive overview of addiction, how it operates, how to identify it, and how to address it. It aims to engage, educate, and empower the audience towards better understanding and action. In fact, I hope that the long-term effect is that people will become more understanding and empathetic towards people struggling with addiction after we get to understand some of the reasons why they do what they do. All right, so to set the ball rolling, even before then, let me just go over briefly the aims and objectives of this small workshop. First of all, to educate the audience about the causes of addiction, discuss the most prevalent types of addictions and how they manifest, explore the impact of addiction on various levels at the individual level, family, community, and nation, and also highlight the most effective therapeutic interventions currently in use. And then we'll look at the way forward regarding individual responsibility and how the community can also assist people dealing with addiction. So, what is addiction? Addiction is, this is what I pulled from Wikipedia. I didn't want a very long definition, even though this looks like it. So it's generally defined as a neuropsychological disorder, defined a pervasive and intense urge to engage in maladaptive behaviors, providing immediate sensory rewards despite their harmful consequences. So the main word here is neuropsychological. In other words, it has something to do with how our brain influences us to engage in a particular behavior. It used to be that when people talked of addiction, they saw individuals dealing with addiction as people of low moral standing or weak minds, people who made poor choices. And as a result, there was a lot of stigma attached to it. But recent research has shown that it is more of a disease than just a simple matter of life choices. So I'll explain that in more detail as we go along. So the operative word behavior here is that the person engages in the behavior which is detrimental to their well-being. But because of the brief pleasures they get from practicing that behavior, they keep doing it and doing it till it takes over and destroys their life. So, what are some of the statistics on addiction in the United States? This is from SAMHSA, that is Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. As of 2016, about 22 million people in the USA suffer from addiction. And of this, only 10% were in treatment. But even the 10%, with the 10%, not all of them were using evidence-based treatments. Some of them were undergoing treatment that had the research had not really supported. In 2021, more than 106,000 people died from drug-related overdoses. And on average, the US government loses about $700 billion a year in combating nicotine, alcohol, illicit drugs, and prescription medication, the menace. And this includes healthcare costs, lost productivity, and crime-related expenses. So what are the causes? Broadly, they are biological, environmental, and they will have emotional and psychological triggers. So, in terms of the biological causes, one of the obvious but overlooked ones has to do with genetics. it's a behavior that can be inherited. And I had a cousin in Ghana whose dad was a compulsive gambler. And when he reached adolescence, he engaged in that behavior. And despite our interventions, taking him to church, advising, everything we did, he's still gambling up to now. He can get his salary on a Friday, by Saturday, he's broke. So even though this is anecdotal, it goes to explain the genetic influence. But there's another more important biological cause. This has to do with the reward circuits in our brain. You know, I'm sure you've heard of dopamine effect. It simply means the hormone in our brain that gives us pleasure. So whenever we receive a reward, like you receive your salary or somebody pays you a compliment or you eat some good food, it stimulates the dopamine center in your brain and you experience some kind of happiness or euphoria. Now, the natural role for dopamine is that it motivates us to engage in productive behaviors like going to work, doing the things that we need to do to function as humans. Unfortunately, whenever we use drugs like cocaine or methamphetamine, it dumps such a huge load of dopamine in our reward centers, the reward centers in our brain, that the euphoria we experience is way above the normal euphoria we are likely to experience in our everyday life. The pleasure is so much that the individual cannot even begin to imagine the magnitude. So after it wears off, the individual is, you know, it creates a kind of desire to experience that same feeling again. So the individual will start trying to take more drugs to experience that overwhelming euphoria again. And from the literature, one can never get that first huge feeling of pleasure. So they keep trying to take more drugs to experience the feeling. Next thing you know, they are fully hooked and they have become people dealing with addiction. So that is what we call the disease model of addiction, as compared to the lifestyle or the other type of addiction where people were likely to judge addicts because they thought they made decisions on as poor lifestyle choices. The fact is that there are biological influences in addiction, and those are even more insidious than the previous way we used to conceptualize addiction. I think it's because of that that government policy has started decriminalizing some aspects of addiction, but we'll talk more about that down the line. So what are the environmental factors in addiction? Some of it has to do with the area we grew up in. If somebody is born in a very low socioeconomic area, especially in the inner cities, drugs are being sold every day right in front of you. So it normalizes the behavior. And adolescents or young people growing up think, oh, it's just a normal thing to start using drugs. So that is one of the environmental influences. Another has to do with peer pressure. We all know that in high school, there is the in crowd. And more often than not, this in crowd indulges in certain behaviors. And for you to be one of them, to join, you have to use some of the drugs that they are using. And that is another way peer pressure can lead to drug use. Another overlooked cause is what we call the hazing rituals in colleges. For instance, if you want to join some fraternities, you have to do some serious binge drinking to show that you have the capacity to be a member of that group. And in recent times, we've heard of stories where boys who had never done alcohol before actually overdid it and died. But that is one of the overlooked causes of this thing. I'm talking about some cultural practices here. Over in Africa, there are some cultures where you are introduced to alcohol as part of your maturing process. And some of it is as young as a baby that is 2 weeks old. But I think what they tell us is that it is to let you know your yes be your yes and your no be your no. So they dip some alcohol on your tongue and they say, if you are Eric, say, Eric, let your truth be your truth and let your no be your no. So we are introduced to alcohol at a very young age. In recent times, they've changed that cultural practice. So instead of alcohol, they use maybe Fanta or Coke. Now, another environmental factor which I've seen a lot in America is the single parent household. More often than not, in a single parent household, the mother or the father is doing 2 or 3 jobs. So they are hardly at home. So in their absence, the predators in the neighborhood start enticing the young ones with some money. And we've seen that in numerous movies. There's a little bit of that in Africa where I came from, but I've seen it a lot in the American society. And I think that is something that really needs to be looked at. The last type of causes that we'll talk about is the emotional and psychological triggers. This is a society that imposes a lot of stress, trauma, and emotional pain on people. And people try to find ways to cope with it. And more often than not, the ways that they come up with are unhealthy. And this can lead to addiction. For instance, there are some high pressure jobs that once you get to work, you have to be up and running. So people have to drink copious amounts of coffee just to get their energy flowing. And at the end of the day, people are so stressed. They're like, I need something to take the edge off the stress. And they head to the bar or the pub. Next thing you know, full-blown alcoholism. So these are some of the emotional and psychological triggers. Now, when I worked at BAG, I had a patient that he owned a dealership and he was a very well-behaved guy. So I was curious. I asked him, what happened? What is your story? And he said he had a car accident and after surgery, they prescribed OxyContin for him. And by the time his injuries healed, he was totally hooked. And it had such a negative effect on him. He lost his house, he got divorced, he hit rock bottom. And his father told him to come to the methadone clinic and start the treatment so that he could get back on his feet. And as at the time I was talking to him, he had bought a new house and he was working. Except that he said he hated coming into the clinic and mixing with what he called all those drug dealers. And I reminded him, some of them have similar stories. So we need to be careful how we judge. But the point is that a lot of the people under opiate addiction, some of them were triggered by OxyContin. And there's actually a movie on Netflix now, Painkiller. It chronicles how OxyContin, which is a form of opium, a very effective addictive form, came into mainstream America. If you get a chance, you might want to have a look. It's a very tragic story. So these are some of the causes of addiction. Doubtless, there are several ones that we can mention, but you can do a little bit of search in your free time. So what are the main types of addiction? I'll group them into three main types. We have what we call substance addictions, we have behavioral addictions, and then we have what we call emerging addictions. The substance addictions have to do with alcohol, illicit drugs, tobacco, and this is a society that legalized tobacco. So even though a lot of people think it's a legal drug, it's very addictive. Nicotine is very addictive. Unfortunately, the marketers have shifted to what they call vaping, e-cigarettes. And they have told the young people that, oh, the e-cigarette doesn't have as much nicotine or it's not as addictive as cigarettes. But the truth is that some of the vapes or the e-cigarettes have 4 times the nicotine content that ordinary cigarettes have. And alcohol and cocaine, heroin, the usual suspects, there's a lot of that. And most of the addiction in the US is certainly related to alcohol and illicit drugs. The second group of addictions is what we call the behavioral addictions. And these, under these, we can group gambling, sex, internet, and so on. These are also addictions in the sense that somebody may practice them for the brief pleasure that they get, but in the long run, they have a detrimental effect on the person. We're talking, we have people we call compulsive gamblers. There are some people whose gambling is so compulsive that they can actually place a bet on how far a frog can jump. So that is how degenerate somebody can be in terms of gambling. And we know that it has serious financial repercussions on people who deal with that. And there's also sex addiction, where the person is compulsively looking for partners or doing some other things, and the end result is that if they are in marriages, it strains the marriages and leads to divorce and so on. And then I was going to talk about internet addiction, but I'll bring it under emerging addictions. And these emerging addictions are those that have come about due to technological advances. So we can talk about social media, can talk about video games, and so on and so forth. These, initially, we thought people were just too caught up in social media and video games and so on. But I remember a couple of years ago, on one of the platforms that I work as a counselor, I had a student from Indonesia who was was on scholarship to a university in Australia. He called and said he had been sacked from school. And I said, why? He said, because he plays video games 16 to 20 hours a day. He couldn't cope with his studies and he had been dismissed. So he wanted me to help him frame a story for his parents because they will be so disappointed. So we did what we could to kind of ease the situation for him, but it kind of gave me a very sharp picture of what video games was doing to our young students. Social media is a whole different beast, if I may use that word. In addition to the negative effects of social media addiction, it has also led to a whole lot of social problems, especially with young people. It has led to increases in suicidality, loneliness, anxiety, and there's even this phenomenon called Facebook depression. I think the mechanism is that when people go on Facebook and see pictures that their friends, they go on social media and see pictures their friends have posted, and they suffer FOMO, FOMO, which is fear of missing out. And they feel like they've been left out of the general happiness. Sorry. They've been left out of the general happiness in life, and it leads to anxiety and depression. There's also cyberbullying, and we've read media reports where some people are bullied so much that they take their own lives. So, social media has had negative effect on school performance, and there's even some studies that show there's an inverse relationship between life satisfaction and social media use. In other words, the more you use social media, the less life satisfaction you report. Social media has had some negative effects on marriages and relationships. There are some news items and some research, of course, but there are stories that have shown, we've seen where the couple comes home and everybody is glued to their phone. There's no communication. Dad is on his phone, mom is on her phone, the children are also on their phone. And we all know that that is not a good relationship. Eventually, something has to give. And there's also research that shows that some personality types actually thrive on social media, albeit in a negative way. For instance, narcissistic personalities, they thrive on the number of likes they get on social media. So it consumes their life, and it becomes a cycle or loop of being reinforced in their narcissistic behavior. Now, why does social media have such this gripping effect on people? I think one thing has to do with the way it's engineered. Someone said the algorithms have been programmed such that you have to you keep coming back for more. You become glued to it. And one thing I've noticed is that social media is the only type of media where if you are away from it, they will send you a message that, oh, the message that you posted has had some comments, so go and look. The next thing you know, the productive thing you were doing, you have to put it aside just to go and check the number of likes you got for your post or your article. I think we are all a little bit guilty of that. When we post an article, even on LinkedIn, we want to see how many people read it or commented, except that the engineering on social media is on a different level. So these are the three broad type of addictions that we have: substance, behavioral, and emerging addictions. As a matter of fact, at the end of the presentation, I put an assessment there for all of us to assess our addiction, whether we are addicted to social media or not. So Linda will take care of that so that we can check the scores. All right. So how does a person show that they are addicted? How does it manifest? Mostly it shows in their behavior or the physical symptoms, and then sometimes the psychological symptoms. In terms of the behavioral, we notice that the person that is somebody who was previously vivacious, suddenly they start withdrawing from their social circles. they withdraw from families and family activities. And then we'll find them now engaging in secrecy or lying outright. So that is some of the things that you should look out for. If you have young children or you are with somebody and they start exhibiting these behaviors, then you know something is going on, and you may need to probably talk to that person to find out what is going on so that they can get some early interventions. Another way it manifests is the physical self. Sometimes it leads to changes in appearance, like sudden weight loss or gain. Or sometimes you see severe symptoms like hands shaking and so on, especially if the person is drinking a lot of alcohol. And then you see bloodshot eyes or poor coordination. Once you notice some of those things, you need to have that talk and find out what is going on. And then in terms of the psychological symptoms, we have people start exhibiting mood swings. You know, somebody that used to be calm, all of a sudden, they get irritated easily. Some show a lot of anxiety, there's depression, or some will just not talk at all. They just sit in a corner and they just tune out. I've heard of this expression where they describe somebody as a functional alcoholic, meaning they may be drinking heavily, but they're able to go to work and perform their task and everything. I think there's nothing like a functional alcoholic. I think sooner or later, the alcoholism will catch up and there will be no more functioning. And when it gets to that cycle, it will be difficult to break unless the person seeks some intervention. So that is how, if you notice any of these symptoms with a close friend, relative, or your children or grown-ups, then you need to start having the talk and encourage them to seek intervention before more damage is done. So how does addiction impact people? We have, it's on several levels. We have impacts on the individual level, at the level of the families, the communities, and the nation at large. In terms of the individual, the most damaging effects are in their finances, their health, and their relationships. If somebody is dealing with addiction, they have to use money that could have been used for other stuff, is used to buy drugs. And if the person is married, you know, that's going to lead to quarrels between husband and wife. And if somebody is severely addicted to opiates, it has a very telling effect on the physical body. They sometimes the appearance starts changing, the teeth begin to fall out, and there is also internal organ damage and so on and so forth. So, and if somebody is seriously caught up in addiction, it starts to affect their job. They may get fired and run into debt. On relationships, it takes a heavy toll, because a lot of the divorce cases that we come up against have to do with one partner dealing with addiction, and therefore having a negative effect and a strain on the relationship. With regards to families, it's more of the same from the individual level. There's increased financial burden, and sometimes there is codependency. In this case, the husband or wife will be having a partner that is dealing with addiction. And because they love the partner, they support them either by giving them money to go and buy the drugs, or looking the other way when the partner is using drugs. And the end result is that the addiction becomes entrenched. And next thing we know, there is divorce and the breakup of the family. In terms of the community, it leads to increased crime rate, unemployment, stigmatization, and all that. I remember when crack cocaine entered the American system. I think this was in the 80s. Whole communities were wiped out. Whole communities were wiped out, especially in the inner cities. And this was captured in a movie on Netflix. I think the title is Crack, Cocaine, Corruption, and Conspiracy. And movies were made about them. And I think some of the lasting effects of the crack epidemic are still with us. And we need to address some of those issues. And we are hoping that government policy will cover those areas so that people can get their lives back on track. In terms of the nation, we already mentioned that the government spends upwards of 700 billion to deal with the healthcare, the crime, and all the issues that arise from the addiction menace. So that is how impactful addiction has been on society. So how do we, if somebody reports that they are dealing with addiction, what is the best way to treat it? Now, there is what we call evidence-based treatment, and there's some other type of treatment. Evidence-based treatment simply means treatment that is supported by the research, by literature, to be effective. And some of the other treatments don't have that depth of research, but they've been around for some time, so people still use them. According to current research, the most effective treatment option is cognitive behavior therapy. Now, cognitive behavior therapy is simply about, it's based on the fact that whatever we think about affects our feelings, and our feelings drive our behavior. So typical example, let's say somebody tells you, you are stupid. This is just by way of illustration. So it sticks in your mind. And then you go home and you start thinking about it. Thinking about, I'm stupid. Am I stupid? You know, next thing you know, you are becoming angry because it's now from your mind, it's now in your heart, it's in your feelings. And if it stays there long enough, you think maybe I need to go and discipline that person, show him that I'm the man or the woman for that matter. So whatever we think about affects our feelings, and this drives our behavior. So cognitive behavior therapy is based on the premise that if we can change how people think about things and get them to have more productive thoughts instead of negative thoughts, then the feelings and the behavior that arise will be more productive. So the focus of cognitive behavior therapy is to deal with negative thoughts, how people deal with negative thoughts, teach them coping skills to reverse negative thoughts into more productive thoughts. The second line of therapy or interventions is medication-assisted treatment. Now, this is where they have some clinics where the person dealing with addiction goes to get some medicine, which mimics the effect of their drug of choice. And the drug that they are given doesn't give them the euphoria or the high that they are used to. So it enables them, it saves them from the withdrawals that they will experience if they don't take any drug at all. So it deals with the withdrawals, and then because it doesn't make them high, they're able to work in a normal way. Some can be truck drivers and so on and so forth. Now, where I used to work, behavioral health group, they practice medication-assisted treatment. So once you come for the drug, you're also given counseling on coping skills and how to get your life back. We teach people how to search for jobs, how to attend interviews. We help them with homelessness issues and so on and so forth. So this is also a very popular treatment option. We don't have them in Africa, but I know that if we had them, we could have, the people dealing with addiction back home will have better outcomes. But it's really a good way to start. So if somebody cannot afford the private cognitive behavioral therapy sessions, they can start with a medication-assisted treatment program. And there are government grants and Medicaid support so that they don't have to pay out of pocket. The next one is 12-step programs. Now, these 12-step programs, as used with Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, they are more like peer group support system, and sometimes they have mentors who also advise people dealing with addiction on the behaviors that they need to adopt and everything. One good thing about the 12-step programs is they introduce spirituality. So one of the steps, you have to acknowledge that there's a higher power and that you submit to that higher power so that you can release your problems to that higher power for help and guidance. There is some blowback from some people regarding the 12-step program because they are resentful of the presence of the religion aspect in it. But other than that, I think it's a good way people can seek help. Generally, in therapy, we are not encouraged to, because of ethical reasons, we can't bring up spirituality unless the client brings it up. Then if you are inclined to that, you can help them use spirituality as part of their coping skills. But with the 12-step program, it is part of it. So we're hoping that people will become more accepting of that. There's also another line of interventions called harm reduction strategies. And this is for those who don't want to go into treatment at all. You go to some cities, they have the Skid Row and the homeless facilities where people are not even ready to leave the area to seek for any help. So in order to minimize the infection rates and reduce HIV and hepatitis and all that, the health or other organizations provide needles. They have what they call needle exchange programs. So they give them to the people and then take away the contaminated needles. So in that case, in that way, they're able to reduce the infection rates for other co-occurring disorders with this population. Now, what is the role of public education in preventing addiction? It is very important, and there have been a lot of campaigns that have created awareness about addiction and provided some support for that matter. Unlike in the 80s when the war on drugs was launched, with stiff penalties for drug dealers and drug users, which ultimately exacerbated the problem of drug use. These days, there's more kindness from the policymakers. For instance, drugs like marijuana have been decriminalized in some states. And I think at the federal level too, but Yeah, so people whose lives were destroyed by having just a few grams of marijuana have had their records scrubbed clean so they can go back to living a normal life, getting a job, and doing the things that they need to do as people to support their families. School programs. It is also very encouraging to know that some schools have counselors that they are trained to provide information on drug use to some students so that a student that is caught up and identified early will be able to avoid the pitfalls. The media campaigns, as we mentioned earlier, we've seen that done with drunk driving. We've seen the commercials where they tell somebody to be buzzed means you are drunk and you go in. And I think those are some cautionary commercials that are very good. We've seen commercials of the people who used to be smokers and have lost toes or hands or the ability to speak. Although the commercials are shocking, I think they are very effective. And these are some of the things that we can do to kind of help educate people about the harm addiction causes. And also, there are a lot of online resources that people can access. In fact, there are some apps currently in use that help with addiction. One of them is called Sober Grade. Sober, from soberness, the Sober Grade. And then there's another called Sober Tool. There's one specifically made for the 12-step program. They call it the 12 steps, the companion. There's another app called Self-Help. And then there's another one called Happify. Of course, there are some hotlines that we can also access. SAMHSA has the hotline 1-800-662-4357. If you have people that are dealing with addiction, you can call those lines for help. 1-800-662-4357. And because there's a high level of suicidality in people dealing with addiction, I'm also posting the suicide hotline here, 988. And for more information on drugs and all the other things that we've talked about, you can go to the SAMHSA website. And there's also NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse. There's a lot of information. There are a lot of videos on YouTube which educate about addiction. So it is recommended, if you know anybody dealing with it, you may want to encourage them to go there. Now, so with all the interventions and all the government policy, the government education and so on, what is the way forward? What are the long-term recovery plans that people can engage in for life after addiction? Life after addiction. First of all, people have to take personal responsibility. People have to take personal responsibility in the recovery process. If the person doesn't indicate that they want help, there is nothing we can do. We can't force them. We can only encourage them to do it. So one thing we can do is, if you have a relative doing, you need to confront them. By confronting, I don't mean a full head-on confrontation. There's always a better way of talking about a problem. So once you're able to do that, you encourage them to accept that they have a problem. And then you can show them some of the resources available, the hotlines, the website, the apps, and then they can start their journey to recovery. We can also, because we know that some of the behavior is induced by the neuropsychology, we can learn to be more empathetic to people. We shouldn't judge people too much, because I remember I had a patient. He was on my caseload for about 4 years. For about 3 years, I was trying to tell him to be abstinent, but he was always testing positive, but I was patient with him. And then one day he started showing clean drug screens. And as at the time I left last month, he was still showing clean drug screens. And he wrote me a letter. And in the letter, he said, I was the only counselor that made him feel like a human being. He said all the other counselors, once he entered their office, they looked at him some way. But I made him feel like he was somebody. And when I was packing my stuff out of the office, I took that letter along. I treasured that letter. But it also showed me that kindness is more important sometimes than even the intervention. So if we are relatives, we need to show kindness and concern. I've seen some, okay, somebody said I should call the names of the apps. So one is called Sober Grade. Sober, from the word to be sober. Sober Grade. The other one is Sober Tool. And then the one on 12 steps says 12 steps, the companion. 12 steps, the companion. And then there's another one called Self-Help. And then another one called Happify. Happify. Let me see if there are some other questions that I missed. Oh, okay. I see that somebody already put some of the information there. So like I said, while acknowledging that external factors like biology and environment play a role, we also need to encourage people to be more proactive in seeking help for their recovery. And we need to encourage them to think about their life goals and also help them build supportive networks so that they can get on a good footing. The workload, the human workload of being a person dealing with addiction is so heavy. The chains are so heavy that it takes more than one person to carry those chains. So the onus is on us to provide that extra help. Somebody is asking why chocolate was shown with the addictions. Okay, so I'm sure we've heard of the expression, somebody has a sweet tooth. People can be addicted to sugary stuff. Because remember, we said addiction starts when the person experiences some pleasure or euphoria with the behavior. And then because they enjoy that behavior, because of the euphoria, they keep doing it. But at a certain point, it starts having a negative effect. So if somebody is eating so much chocolate, eventually what happens? Their blood sugar will jump and put them at risk for diabetes. Sorry. So that is the reason why we added chocolate to that distance. We want to let people know that it's not only the big guns that need to be looked at. There are some addictions that are sneaky, and chocolate happens to be one of them. I hope that answers your question. Okay, now what should the family and the community do? What we should do is We should assess programs that provide guidelines for how the families and communities can support someone in recovery. Now, something that we as family members can do is that we should be open in communicating with our relatives or significant people who are dealing with addiction. The communication should be open. And we should also learn to set boundaries. For instance, I've seen a situation where a father told a son that if you get drunk, you can't come into the house. Now, that may be harsh, but these are some of, I think there can be variations on such boundaries to help people confront the addictions that they are dealing with. But then again, like I said, kindness sometimes works more wonders than the strict and authoritarian way of dealing with it, although it also has its own uses. And then what are we to do as citizens? We have to advocate for people dealing with addictions. This could include advocating for better healthcare access, more comprehensive addiction education in schools, and criminal justice reform to decriminalize addiction and focus on rehabilitation by providing more funds. I think the decriminalization has already started and a lot of people are already benefiting from it. Now, what are you and I to do? What are we going to do? Sometimes some of the organizations that deal with addiction, like Thrive Alabama or BAG, they have some community workshops or community events. Whenever we can, we should try and be present at such events to lend support. The more people show up, the more those dealing with addiction know that, oh, we also have some support. People don't think we are such monsters. And like I said, that empathy always works wonders. If there are some campaigns that are asking for donations, please, let's donate. If you can't do the work, send money so that somebody can do the work. So those are some of the things that we can do to help people dealing with addiction, because ultimately, what affects your neighbor affects you too. For instance, the 700 billion that the government used to do with addiction stuff, that money could have been used to provide some other services for us. So it's not somebody's problem, it's our problem. So that is where I would like to end for now. Now, Linda.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so are you going to deploy the assessment, or we do the question and answers first?
Up to you. I go ahead and do the Q&A and then we can do the assessment.
Let's do the Q&A. Okay, yeah. So I'm open for questions.
At this time, if you have any additional questions, I know that we had two persons who asked about the chocolate. I'll also post another link in there, but just like Johnson shared about the fat and the sugar, also going back to when he initially began with the dopamine. But if there are any other questions, if you don't want to ask them verbally, please type it in the chat.
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
Hi, Linda. Hi, Doc. How are you? Just wanted to find out, is there a personality trait that's that you would call an addictive personality?
That is a tough question. And the reason is that because of the numerous ways that people become addicts, it is difficult to tell. But one would say people who are more likely to be introverts. And the reason I'm giving, I don't have the research here, but sometimes when they want to mix socially, I'm using anecdotal evidence here. They are like, oh, okay, let me take something to get some Dutch courage to go and talk to that girl across the room. So that is one way the behavior starts with people who are more likely to be described as introverts. But I need to really confirm that with the research. But high stress, people who work in high stress jobs are also at risk. But like you said, you want to find out more about the personality types, and the one that readily comes to mind is the introvert.
Okay, thank you. So to follow that up, so would it be because as the way that the answer that you gave, it causes me to come up with another question, which is, would it be also those with a certain level of trauma?
Oh, yeah, I think we addressed that when we spoke about the psychological, but I didn't go into too much detail. Let me see if I can explain it. So people dealing with trauma, they are in pain and they need to find some coping mechanisms. So if they don't get healthy coping skills or go into therapy to get some intervention, then they are more likely to self-medicate. And that could be an avenue for becoming addicted.
Okay. And could you elaborate a little bit more on the CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy, as a part of the treatment?
Okay. All right. So like I said, the cognitive behavioral therapy operates on the premise that whatever we think about affects our feelings, and our feelings drive our behavior. So we're dealing with negative thoughts. Now, there are some people who, in fact, the default setting for us as human beings is negative thinking. I think it's somebody who says evolutionary. So we wake up in the morning and we are like, oh, not another day at the job, you know. That's our default setting. So some people learn coping strategies, either doing morning devotion or going to the gym. The Buddhists who chant, the Christians who do their prayers and everything. Everybody, those who are functioning very well, they know what to do. But a lot of people are caught up in that negative thinking. So what cognitive behavior therapy does is we teach people how to arrest or stop the negative thinking and replace them with more positive ways, more productive ways of thinking, so that they are able to, their feelings or their emotions are put in a more positive zone. And the belief is that if their feelings are more positive, then they can behave in a more positive or productive way. So for instance, somebody who has the negative thought that nobody loves them, if you are able to utilize the skills building in cognitive behavior therapy to let them get an insight that maybe one or two people don't like them, but it's not universal. If A and B don't like them, other people like them. So once they have that belief, then they start having some self-belief, a boost in their self-esteem, and then they may go out and do the things that they want to do. Okay, so somebody said, teach how to arrest or stop negative thinking and replace with more productive ways of thinking.
Oh, that's just me typing out your definition.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. So that is what cognitive behavior therapy does. There are so many skills in cognitive behavior therapy that one can learn. And I remember somebody asked me, so how long does it take for me to master cognitive behavioral therapy? And I said, oh, it's like, how long does one take to learn a habit? I was having a session with a safety manager, and she asked me that question. I said, when you employ people and you are training them at the workplace, how long does it take? And she said,
6 months.
oh, the person has to perform the operation 200 times for the person to master. And I said, how long does this 200 times cover? And she said about 60 days. And I said, it's almost like what the research has put out there. The research says that if we want to learn a particular behavior or habit, we have to practice it for about 3 months before it becomes automatic, before we do it without thinking. So sometimes when I tell a client this, they are like, oh, that's too long. But then I explain that it's like going to the gym to start bodybuilding. The first week, you are cutting too much. Should I continue or not? But by the time you get to the 3rd week, you start noticing some biceps on your body and you're like, I like this. And then that encourages you. By the time you hit the 3-month practice period, or if you're building your body, that 3 months, when you wear a t-shirt, somebody will comment. If you're a man, somebody will say, oh, you got a nice chest or something. You got some nice arms. And that gives you positive reinforcement to continue the behavior. If somebody is dealing with addiction and they hit that 3 months of abstinence, their features improve. Their face becomes healthy. Everything about them improves. And that is when they get a positive reinforcement that they are doing well.
Johnson, we
Thank
also
you. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry.
Hello.
We also have another question, and it asks, did you give the name of an organization that utilizes the MAT approach in our area? And I put in the chat the link to the Alabama Department of Mental Health, where they can click and actually search for a provider in the zip code closest to them.
Yeah. And there's also, apart from BAG, there are some organizations that don't provide the medication, but they give assistance, like Wellstone Behavioral, of course, Thrive, Alabama. So these are some places that you can also access for help. And like I said, BHG, in addition to taking Medicaid, if you have Medicaid, you don't have to pay for your medicine, your daily medicine. They also have grants from the federal government, which help you to pay for your daily medications until you have a job and you can start paying on your own. And we've had some, I need to mention here that I used to be skeptical about the behavioral health group, the medication-assisted treatment model. But I spent a long time there. And I have seen guys that came in looking like, excuse my language, looking like somebody dragged them in from somewhere. And over time, they just bounced back. And a couple have invited me to their wedding and their children's birthdays and so on, just to show some gratitude. But I tell them the ethical considerations don't allow that, but I appreciate it. Some have bounced back, they bring gifts, everything. We put them in the pool so that every counselor can enjoy. What I found out was that if they stay long enough in the program, then the outcomes are very good. The outcomes are very good. In fact, any treatment is better than no treatment at all. I had 2 cousins that came in. One left after 2 weeks, but the other stayed in the program. A month later, the one that was in the program told me the other one had been arrested selling drugs in a school zone and been sentenced to 10 years in federal prison.
Yes.
So it shows that programs like BAG and the other organization, they are helpful. After I became convinced that they are really useful, I went to see a mentor in he He's a big man in Huntsville, Dr. Rin. So I told him, Dr. Rin, I wish we could have a methadone clinic in Ghana. And he said, we've had some experiences where we set up the clinics and the people that were managing the clinic started spending all the money. Now, are you willing to move back to Ghana to head such a clinic if we set one up? And I said, Dr. Rin, you know, I want to help people, but that is not a question I can answer right now. And he said, okay. So the challenge is getting trustworthy people back home to run a clinic like that. But it is something that is still on my mind and I might revisit it down the line.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Our time is going away. So what I'm gonna do is if you can do your wrap up, and then we'll do, for those who want to stay on and do the survey, then they can stay on and do the survey.
Okay, all right. So basically, I think we looked at the what we mean by addiction. You know, we looked at the current working definition of addiction as a disease rather than a lifestyle choice. And then we looked at the causes, and then we looked at the prevalent types, especially with regards to the emerging addictions. They are causing a lot of problem for young people. So we really need to, in fact, that merits a whole presentation on itself. Then we also looked at how addiction manifests in people, how they express it, and then its effect on individuals, family, and society. What we need to know is that early intervention, you know, once we suspect somebody is dealing with it, we need to confront them or talk to them about it and encourage them to seek intervention, because once it's kind of, the behavior becomes entrenched, it is a little more difficult to get out of it. So early intervention is the key here. And then also the range of effective treatments are a lot. So, and I think people need to start taking a look at the apps. There are some people who are very private. They don't want to be seen going to any clinic because of stigma. The apps can help them deal with that, just like how weight loss people are using the apps and so on. The same way people dealing with addiction can also tap into that. And also, for us as individuals, the tendency is to just stand somewhere and think other people are dealing with, but whatever affects them affects us, because we are all interconnected. We are all interconnected. So if it's a donation that you can make to some of these organizations, please do. And hopefully together we can make light work of the situation.
Okay. Thank you so much, Johnson, for that wonderful presentation. It was a lot of good information. And I do believe that we have been called to action by your presentation, where we have just not only learned about what addiction is and how it manifests itself, but we also learned about how we can play our part in the fight to help those who are suffering with addiction, to also do preventative care, and also to lend our support to the world at large.
Linda,
Yes.
I'm sorry, this is Wanda Cross. I just have a quick question. An assessment, I thought, was mentioned.
Yes, but because of the time, what we're going to do is we're going to have the closing prayer, and then those who want to stay on, they'll be able to stay on, and you can stay on and take the assessment. It will come up on the screen.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, so we're going to have, I'll call it the closing prayer for those who need to go, and it will be the intermission prayer for those who will stay on. Okay, let's bow our head. Oh Lord, our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the wonderful information that you blessed our speaker with, Johnson. Father, we thank you for him being able to make the information plain, making it clear, providing resources there, Father, that we can utilize. Father, we thank you for everyone who was able to attend the presentation. We ask, oh Lord, that you will continue to give them wisdom so that they will know how to apply the information that is used. Now, Lord, I ask that as we continue with the survey, dear Lord, that those who are able to stay on will be able to do it and gain benefit from it. And those who have to leave their Father, take them safely to their various destinations. In Jesus' precious name, we do pray. And Lord, thank you for Johnson. Thank you for his willingness to be used by you to change lives, dear Father, all across the globe by being a licensed professional counselor who is committed to helping others learn to live well. And we thank you, dear Lord, in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Hi, quick question before you go, Doc. How can we get the PowerPoint?
You can get the PowerPoint with the email that will go out with the recording.
Okay.
And Johnson is going to stay on. He's going to stay on while we do the assessment as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sister Linda.
You're welcome. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. And this is a poll for us to assess our internet addiction. And so just check and see if on your screen, can you see the poll?
Give me just a minute.
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Yes,
Okay.
I can.
So go ahead and just go ahead and click through those 10 questions. Your answers are anonymous, by the way, so it won't come up on the screen who answered what. It'll just have the total results. So click 5 if this is something that occurs always with you. 4 if it's often. 3 if it's frequently. 2 occasionally. 1 rarely. Let me know if you're able to respond to the 10 questions. And as I mentioned, we won't see who answered what. We will just get the final results of what the scores range for each question, but we will not be able to see who answered what.
How often do others?
When you're finished the 10 questions, please let me know and we'll move on. There's another 10 after this one, but we're going to look at these and then we'll move on to the next 10. Are we ready to move on to the next one? You can give me a,
Yes,
I am.
yes.
okay.
Yes,
So I want to show you the results so far to these questions. Is there somebody else who, I don't want to move. Is there anybody who is not finished? Okay. So we're going to look at these ones. Can you see the results?
Yes.
yes, I can see them.
No,
Yes, I can.
Okay. So those are the results from the
no,
first.
I could not see the results.
Oh,
Are you, what kind of device are you on?
the phone.
You should be able to. Okay, we're going to move on to the next one. And here are the next set of 10 questions. And just like the first one, it's anonymous, so we won't see who answered what. We'll just get the total results. Everybody can see the poll?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
And I'm so sorry. I completely forgot to read all the different questions out so that those who were watching the recording, because they would not be able to see the poll. So some of the questions are, how often do you find yourself anticipating when you will go online again? How often do you fear that life without the internet would be boring, empty, and joyless? How often do you snap, yell, or act annoyed if someone bothers you while you are online? How often do you lose sleep due to being online? How often do you feel preoccupied with the internet when offline or fantasize about being online? How often do you find yourself saying just a few more minutes when online? How often do you try to cut down the amount of time you spend online and fail? How often do you try to hide how long you've been online? How often do you choose to spend more time online over going out with others? And how often do you feel depressed, moody, or nervous when you are offline, which goes away once you are back online? So I will now end this poll and share the results. So here you see the results from this one. I'll leave this up for another minute or so. And while you have that, can you still see the results?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Yes.
Awesome. And while you're doing that, I'm going to read the other 10 questions for the recording. How often do you find that you stay online longer than you intended? How often do you neglect household chores to spend more time online? How often do you prefer the excitement of the internet to intimacy with your partner? How often do you form new relationships with fellow online users? How often do others in your life complain to you about the amount of time you spend online? How often do your grades or schoolwork suffer because of the amount of time you spend online? How often do you check your email before something else that you need to do? How often does your job performance or productivity suffer because of the internet? How often do you become defensive or secretive when anyone asks you what you do online? And the final question, how often do you block out disturbing thoughts about your life with soothing thoughts of the internet? So now I will stop sharing. And can everyone see us once again?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Now I am going to ask if anyone has any other questions um, at this time for Johnson. Well, if there are no other questions, I want to say thank you once again to Johnson for giving up his time and attention. For those of you who would like to ask private questions, you can stay on and I can put you in a private room with Johnson if you have any questions for him. I will also go now and put up on the screen, I'll put his contact information so that you will be able to reach out to him after this session. And here's his contact information, where he's located, telephone numbers, and email address. For those of you who are, I call it in the student mode, where you just take screenshots of stuff, that's one way that you'll be able to capture this information. I also want to invite you back next month on October the 7th for our next presentation, which will be a continuation of our series on Alzheimer's. So Jennifer Beal, who is actually a professor at Stanford, she will be our presenter. She's also one of the Alzheimer's educators, and she will be presenting on effective communication, where we're looking at how Alzheimer's and dementia can affect the individual's ability to communicate as they go through the different stages. And also she will provide us tips how we can better communicate with people living with the disease. So I encourage you to join us Saturday, October the 7th at 5 p.m. Central. We will be on the same Zoom link. So please bookmark it, save the information. You can go right now to the top of your screen and click on that arrow to the right of Zoom. And when the information comes down, just click on the link, and that copies the link to your clipboard, and you can paste it somewhere so that the next month, when you want to join us, that you will be able to just click that link and come on in. We welcome you to come on in. So I'm going to stop the recording now,